Hey folks, so today I want to give you a demo of Redwood's experimental render modes. This is a major new feature coming soon to Redwood's next hub. It's going to be a significant departure to how you build apps with Redwood. It enables new ways of fetching data apart from cells. And also what you get to do is decide how your routes are going to be rendered. This is a significant change. It means we move away from the Jamstack model and become server rendered first. And there's a lot of moving parts and a lot of things that we still need to work out. But your feedback at this stage, how it feels like to use this experimental version, is invaluable. So let's take a look at the documentation we have available first. Do spend some time looking through the concept section here. Someone in the chat will hopefully send you this link. Over in the introduction, we explain what render modes actually mean, how this changes how you think about building your Redwood app. As I said before, it is different to how you've been building your Redwood apps. So you do need to spend some time reading through the concept section. We do have guides here on how you can try it on a new project as well on an existing project. Do keep in mind that you need Vite set up on your project to be able to use these render modes. And at this stage, definitely do not use this in production. It's very, very early. This is preview, early access for you to try out, see what it's like to use these things. A lot of these APIs might change. A lot of these concepts are a little bit still in the works. So any feedback, any gaps in the implementation that you find, if you report it back, that would be awesome. In the concept section, we talk about having two servers. So before, we only used to have the API server. Now we have a front-end server. This is because we're doing server-side rendering as well as having a GraphQL API. Render modes, this is talking about having the HTML and streaming render mode. So on a per route basis, you get to decide just by setting a prop how Redwood is going to render your route. Route hooks, which we're going to look at today. We actually introduced this concept before. Route hooks sit next to your page. And these are functions that run on the server before your route gets rendered. And we go a little bit more into details about the server data route hook and the meta route hook. And there's a little section on what currently this doesn't support yet. So let's take a look at this in practice. There is change in the structure of the website and the files that you put in there. Your components, layouts, all of these things stay as they are, but the entry point, how you bootstrap your app, has changed a little bit. So we still have the app TSX. We have the entry client, which if you've been using Vite, you will have come across before. But there is a slight change. In the entry client, there's a new document component. Let's have a look at the entry server. And entry server is a new file. So this one also renders the document and adds this new server context provider. And we'll get into why this happens in a little bit. But let's take a look at the document. Why is it there, first of all? Because with render modes or React 18 streaming, the concept of an index HTML doesn't really exist anymore. I know this is there at the moment, and that's because it's early in alpha at the moment, but conceptually, it's important to know that your entire app is being rendered by React. React is going to render everything, including the head of your HTML. And this unlocks some features that we'll go into in a bit. Let's take a look at the landing page. The landing page has two cells on it. It has the category cell, which is rendering this part here, and it has the recipe cell, which is the rest of the cards here. Once you click through to a recipe, it goes to the recipe detail page, and it gives you the instructions here. But how do I fetch the data for recipes without a cell? So let me first remove the recipe cell so that you can clearly see where this data comes from. So there's none of these get rendered. And now what we're going to do is we're going to create a route hook for the landing page and use server data here. So in the route hooks file, you can define your server data route hook and a meta route hook. So let me delete this, and if we write it from scratch, it'll make a little bit more sense. So what we're trying to do here is we're trying to access a list of recipes that are in the database and pass it to the React component. And to do that, there's two ways to do it. One is I can import DB from the API side, and I can, thank you, Copilot, that looks just right. And I can pull out all of my recipes from the database and then return a list of recipes. To use this on the client side, what you need to do is go back to the page or the component that you're using, and there's a new React hook called use server data. So let's use that. Use server data, I give it the type, which says it's going to return an object with the key recipes, and it's going to have a bunch of recipes. And this type is coming from Prisma. So use server data, we now have the data. Let's console log that and just see what comes through. And we can see the whole list of recipes comes through. So this is being directly queried in Prisma, and it's returning the full list here. And if we wanted to use this without using a cell, it's really straightforward because you have all of this data here already. So what you need to do now is uncomment this section. What I'm doing here is I'm saying for each recipe in my server data, render a recipe card, give it a key, and on click, navigate to the recipe page. And there we go. It's rendering it without cells. Notice here that I have a cell for the category still and have data rendered from the server data hook, both at the same time. You can use both, and one of the things that you might choose to do is that you might have critical data in your server data hook, because before rendering the page, it's going to wait for that data to come through. So you want to minimize the amount of work you're doing there. And then for non-critical data, you can add a cell if you would like to fetch that extra data. So let me turn off JavaScript and see what happens here. So this is JavaScript disabled with my extension, and let me refresh the page. And you can see here the category still is in its loading state, but the recipes have been rendered. And this is because we're doing server-side rendering with the server data hook. Next, let's take a look at the meta route hook. The meta route hook also runs before your page gets rendered, but its purpose is different. You use it to set the HTML meta tags on your page. So let's go to the recipe page. That's this route here. And I'll launch the dev console and take a look at what's in the head tag. You can see there's one meta tag, but not much else. What we want is for the title of the page to show here. Now, in the past, what we used to do with Redwood is you would drop into your recipe page, you would add a meta tags component like that. But with this version, we need to remove this meta tag component because it won't work that way. It changes how you set these meta tags. To do this, you find the file to put your meta route hook. So in this case, it's the recipe page, right? So I go to the recipe page route hook. I already have a server data hook here, but let's add the meta hook. So export const meta, and there's a type called meta hook. Meta hooks receive server data. So anything that you run inside your server data hook will become available in the meta. So in this case, what I'm doing is in the server data hook, I'm looking at the parameters that we receive from the URL. So in this case, the ID of the recipe. And then I'm using a service to extract the recipe, and then pass it to the meta hook. You can, of course, using the use server data hook on your React component, also render the page on the server if you wish to. So now let's just return a title. A title, hello world. Let's see what happens. And you can see here the title on the browser has changed, but what it's also done is it's added the title tag here, but also the OG title right here. And this is going to be helpful for unfurling your links, for social media previews. This has been one of the most major requested features from Redwood users for a while, and this is going to help you achieve it. So let's add a few more things. First, you can return one object, but you can also return a list of meta tags. So let's make the title to be server data dot. We're returning a recipe here, so it's going to be title most likely. This has a generic type, so to help me with that, I'm going to add it in here. It's not title, it's name here. So once we add it, the name comes through. But for social media previews, we also want more than that. We probably want a description. And the content is this, but not quite. There's a field called blurb, which is this section here. That's what we want in the description. And you can see it comes through over here. Last but not least, we probably want an image for the social media previews. So let's add an image as well. So name is OG image. And the content is going to be server data dot image URL. Once we've added that, it comes through here. Now, let's see how these meta tags would be used in practice. And to do this, let's first build a production version of our app. This is supported in the experimental version. So yarn rw build. Nothing's really changed here. But what we're going to do now is we're going to run both the front-end server as well as the API server. And to do that, once you've built it, yarn rw serve fee. So that launches the front-end server. And if we do a refresh here, you'll see that it's saying, oh, I didn't receive any data. The server data hooks still render the content because it's not using the GraphQL API. But because we haven't launched the API server yet, it's rendering only the content that's available to the front-end server. Let's also run the backend server. Again, you don't need to do this during dev. You only need to do this when you're running in production. Once you've done that, let's refresh and you can see all of the data is now coming through again. So let's go back to the page. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to serve one of these links to a tool that I use for checking Open Graph headers. So npx local tunnel 8922. This is my link. This is as if we've deployed this application on the internet. So let me find one of these recipes, one that I like. Let's take the pizza one. And let's go to opengraph.xyz. And we'll drop in this link here. It goes off and parses using a bot. It parses the HTML rendered by the server. And you can see here a preview of what it would look like on Facebook, on Twitter, on LinkedIn, Discord, so on and so forth. And all of this is enabled because we're rendering these meta tags dynamically based on the ID of the URL. Based on the ID of the recipe, we're looking up that data and then rendering it as meta tags. Super cool, no? And last but not least, let's take a look at the render mode prop, which you can now add to your routes. So let's take a look at the About page here. It's a half-finished page, but you can see the concept is that it's static data. There's a bunch of content here, maybe images, maybe you want to talk about your team, and this page doesn't have a lot of interactivity. So what you can do to make it very cacheable, very fast, is that you can add this render mode HTML here. Once you've done that, you can have a quick look at what gets injected, and you'll notice that, yes, there's the CSS, but there's no JavaScript on this page. What this means is that within a single Redwood app, you can have highly dynamic pages like we did in the landing page and the recipe page. But you can also have static content. So this is something that you would normally generate with Gatsby, I guess 11t, static page generators. But you can have all of that simply by specifying what render mode you want.